The foundation of the philosophy known as libertarianism is the non-aggression principle, the idea that it's wrong to initiate violence against another person, and that physical force against human beings is only justified if you're defending against force or fraud. So that's a decent concept. So far, so good. Now, there is a Libertarian Party, at least in name, in the U.S., and lots of pro-freedom people go rah, rah, rah about it, and I don't. And I object to it, and I criticize it for a number of reasons. But I thought I should make this video making it very clear the main reason that I do not at all support the Libertarian Party. Now, you might just think it's because I don't think they're likely to win, which they're not. They're not at all likely to win. They're not going to win legislatively. They're going to accomplish absolutely nothing. Once upon a time in 1994, near the very end of my days of being a statist, there was the Republican Revolution, which wasn't merely Republican. It was a whole bunch of people saying lots of very libertarian stuff about we got to just shred taxes and regulation and hack away this department and that department at the federal level and all that good stuff. There were a bunch of people out there sounding like they really meant it. Phil Gramm and Newt Gingrich and Rick Santorum, none of them meant it. They're all statists, and they've all demonstrated that since then. But they had some good rhetoric, and I was rah, rah, rah at the time because I believed, yay, this will actually limit government. Well, it didn't. It accomplished nothing. I think a bunch of the people on their way in were actually well-intentioned and thought they were going to do something, and a bunch of them were honest enough to come out and say, yeah, we can't do anything. The system doesn't at all work the way they pretend it does to the general public. If you don't go in and kiss the butt of the establishment, you don't get committee appointments, and then you can't do this, and you can't do that, and you can't do anything. So I've long since given up on the notion that a political solution is at all possible. But that is not my main complaint about the Libertarian Party. If somebody valiantly and zealously wants to pursue some solution that I think has zero chance of success, which is what I do think about the Libertarian Party, that doesn't make them my enemy. I mean, if somebody says, let's charge across this quarter-mile-long open field with our slingshots and challenge that 100-foot-tall steel wall with the 50 caliber machine guns on top of it, I'm going to say that's not going to work. It's going to end badly for you. That doesn't make you my enemy. Now, if you're trying to talk everybody else into it, and having them throw their time and energy and hope into something that I think is doomed to fail, I'm going to say so. But if you really believe that's the way to try it, okay, you're still not my enemy. Now, the Libertarian Party takes the time and energy and hope and money from a hell of a lot of people and accomplishes essentially nothing, if you ask me. And so I'm not at all a fan of that much energy from well-intentioned advocates of freedom being hurled into a black hole that accomplishes essentially nothing. But that also is not my main objection to the Libertarian Party, because people are free to try whatever they think will work. And I might tell them if I think that's not nearly going to work, as I've told people for a very long time about the Libertarian Party. But that's not my main problem. Here is my main problem with the Libertarian Party. They're not libertarian. The underlying question is binary. There's two choices. Either you own yourself or somebody else has the right to rule you. Those are the only two choices. You're either somebody else's slave or you have the right to be free. Now that's pretty basic. Hopefully most libertarians would say, yeah, well, what's your point? My point is this. When it comes down to it, government is very good at escalating their demands and their violence and saying, you will do as we say, and we will stomp on you and do nasty things to you if you don't. Okay, yeah, well, it's an institution that's what it does. It's thuggery and theft and extortion, and it pretends it's representing us and for the common good and all that silliness. That's what it is. Now, when something is that powerful, often on a practical basis, You don't want to charge the walls with your slingshot because it's not going to end well. It's not going to accomplish anything. To like go and do battle with them, literally do battle with them, doesn't usually end well. So the people who say, okay, I'm not going to like go have a shootout with the feds over something. I might comply, I might hide, whatever, but I won't win in that setting, so I'm not going to do that. Okay, fine. I completely understand. I completely sympathize. That makes perfect sense. However, the underlying mentality and the underlying belief system is what matters. And if you don't believe you have the right to respond to aggressive escalation with defensive escalation, then you don't believe in freedom. If, for example, some libertarian says, oh, we're not encouraging people to break the law, why not? Why would you not encourage people to break the law? Now, if you're telling people it's risky, it's hazardous, you're going to have to like weigh the risks and benefit yourself, and in this setting, it may not actually accomplish anything. You know, that tactical considerations, that's fine and dandy. But if you imply, oh, we would never suggest that people break the law, then you don't believe in freedom. Because what you're saying is, at the end of the day, when government says you will do this, well, of course we're going to obey. Well, that literally makes you anti-freedom. It makes you a statist. Because if you, at the end of the day, think you're obligated to bow to them, then all you're doing is begging the master for permission to be a little bit more free, which he's not going to give you anyway. But the fact that you're begging tells him that you think it's up to him. We would never encourage people to break the law, and we certainly don't at all condone the use of force against law enforcers. Then you do not believe in freedom. Because they sure as hell condone the use of force against you by the badge-wearing thugs of the state. And for you to talk as if defensive force against that is immoral and unconscionable is you telling everybody, oh, of course, you should let them, when they escalate it to violence, you should let them win. That you're morally obligated to let them win, not just on a practical basis that, you know, don't pick a fight you're going to lose, but you're somehow a horrible person if you even think of responding to state violence with defensive force. No, you're not. And if you're opposed to that, you're opposed to freedom. Because unless they own you, you don't have any obligation to pay tribute to them. You don't have any obligation to obey whatever crap they call law. And you don't have any obligation to passively allow them to victimize you or the people around you. And to talk the way most libertarians talk strengthens the foundation of authoritarianism. It skips over the one thing that matters, the choice between you own yourself or you're the property of the state. And in so much of their rhetoric, they accept the wrong answer to that question, and then they bicker about trivia. And they say things like, if elected, we're going to repeal the income tax. Okay, on a practical level, it would be nice if government stopped robbing people. They're not going to. The chances of you repealing the income tax are exactly zero. So it's not going to happen anyway. But when you say, we would repeal the income tax, is that all you have to say on the subject? Are you going to sit there and imply that, well, if we don't repeal the income tax, of course, you're all obligated to pay tribute to your masters. You're all morally obligated to hand over a portion of what you produce to these political parasites, unless and until we can get those political parasites to give us their legislative permission to not be robbed. Because when your focus is on repealing this and legislating that, what you're saying is the solution to this is to get the masters to tell us we're allowed to be free. If you think that's the solution, you're already a slave inside your own head. And everything you're saying and everything you're doing is reinforcing the insane, anti-human, evil notion that we need the permission of the masters to be free. We don't. And you're never going to get that permission. Now, the problem is the discussion gets very uncomfortable if you're an actual principled libertarian, because then you have to actually say things that go against most people's indoctrinations and their paradigms and the way they see the world. Then you'd have to actually say, you know, aggression is wrong, even if they have a badge, and even if they call it a law, and defending yourself is morally justified, even if your attacker says, I'm the law and you're the criminal. Defending yourself by any means necessary is still morally justified. Now, tactically, it's often not a good idea because you'll just end up dead and accomplish nothing. But that's not the question. The question is it morally justified? And yet a hell of a lot of supposed libertarians don't dare to come down on the right side of that because they might sound too extreme and then they might not get donations and votes. So they focus on begging the masters for permission. And when faced with something like the article I wrote a long time ago and the video that was made out of it called When Should You Shoot a Cop?, they pee themselves and run to be first in line to say, that's not what I'm advocating. First of all, watch the video and see what it actually says. Because if that's not what you're advocating, and by the way, the video doesn't say run out and shoot cops. It says, when should we? And examines the historical question and shows that literally most of the world would have been better off if people decided to shoot cops a lot earlier, such as in the Soviet Union and Red China and under the Third Reich and in North Korea and under lots of oppressive regimes. If the law enforcers of those regimes had been shot early on, they wouldn't have gotten so oppressive. Now, you can say it's not that bad here. Not yet. Okay, that's fine. The video doesn't even tell you where you should draw the line, at what point you think you should actually defend against legalized aggression. It asks the question and points out there has to be a line somewhere. Because if at no point you advocate resisting injustice if it's done in the name of law enforcement, you're all the way a slave already inside your own head and in body. Because you don't believe in defensive force if the aggressor pretends to be authority. Okay, you can have that position, but don't pretend to be pro-freedom because you're not. You're absolutely pro-slavery. You are pro-totalitarianism. If you think at the end of the day you should never disobey, and you should certainly never forcibly resist, you are 100% pro-totalitarianism. The fact that you hope the master will be nicer than that is completely irrelevant because you've already decided that it's up to the master to decide whether he's going to be nice or not. And all we're allowed to do is bicker, whine, beg, and then obey. If that's your position, you're not pro-freedom, you're not even libertarian. You're a statist trying to ride the coattails of the philosophy because A, it sounds cool and most people don't know what it means, and B, you're hoping to get attention and support and donations and maybe votes for you and your organization so you can feel like you're doing something when what you're actually doing has zero chance of success on a practical basis, but way more importantly is reinforcing the foundational, insane, evil premise of statism, which is that they have the right to control us and rule us and extort us, and that the only remedy that proper civilized people have is playing their idiotic game of politics and legislation, going along with that inherently illegitimate, inherently violent and evil system to beg their permission. And that means you are acting as their propagandists. You are, whether on purpose or not, spreading the insane notion that we have to bow to them unless and until we can convince them to tell us that we're allowed to be free. So I want to see a libertarian candidate who dares to go out there and say, well, I mean, on the off chance, which is essentially zero, that we actually got any political power, we would repeal these taxes. But in the meantime, you have no obligation to pay them. It might be hazardous not to, because they might try to steal your stuff. They might even cage you. I mean, that's pretty dang rare, but they might even do that. But you have no obligation to pay tribute to these psychos. This is immoral. And it's immoral whether or not the law says so. Here's the ultimate irony of trying for a political solution. If 49% of the voters vote to do away with all taxes, it does nothing at all. 51% won, whoops, keep on paying. If 10% or even 5% of people just said, we don't care what your law says, we're not going to pay it anymore, it immediately becomes unenforceable. 10% of the population is 30-some, of this country is 30-some million people. Do you really think they have the resources to collect or prosecute 30-some million people who just say, we're not going to vote, we're going to bicker about your legislation, we're sure as hell not going to ask permission, we're just going to trade without telling you and without giving you a cut, screw you. That tiny percentage of the population has the power to topple any authoritarian empire. 49%, even if we actually had real democracy where it made any difference, which we don't, would accomplish nothing. So to push pro-freedom people in the direction of playing the game of politics and elections and democracy, A, wastes their energy and their time and hope, and B, reinforces the foundational evil of authoritarianism, which is the notion that any of this is legitimate, that we have any moral obligation to pay tribute to these psychos, that we have any moral obligation to obey whatever arbitrary crap they call law this week. We don't, and actual libertarians understand that we don't. And instead of focusing on, can we learn their voodoo processes and their voodoo terminology and say we have a resolution to appoint the spread of a, or do we say we already own ourselves, we don't need your fucking permission? Because the former is not libertarian and it's not pro-freedom. The latter is libertarian and it's pro-freedom. You don't need the permission of your victimizers to be free. The intended victim of a rapist doesn't need the rapist's permission to have the right to not be raped. The intended victim of the purse snatcher doesn't need the permission of the purse snatcher in order to avoid having a purse snatched. Stop begging your abusers and victimizers for permission and stop portraying to the rest of the world that we need their fucking permission. We don't. And you are not libertarian, and you are not pro-freedom, and you are not doing any favors for actual self-ownership and non-aggression and freedom when you reinforce all that crap by playing their game. Well, if only we can add our clown to their circus. Stop fucking doing that. Become clear in your own head what self-ownership and non-aggression really means, and you will abandon that process entirely because you will see that A, it's utterly illegitimate, and B, you do not want anybody else to think that you are giving your blessing to the process and these ridiculous cult rituals. If you want people to understand that they own themselves, don't teach them how to beg the master for freedom. Teach them how to take freedom for themselves.